Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that every one of you is having a beautiful day. I hope that every one of you is finding a way to cope with this crazy world we live in, and that you see what's happening now is a real giant period of growth. I once heard a great quote that said, "Growth and comfort do not coexist." And so, under that auspice, under that giant cloud of a world that is emerging, I want to introduce to everybody here the great guest I have today, the one and only Chip Paul. He is a Chickasaw citizen, biohacker expert, speaker, regulatory consultant, contributor to the American Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine, TrueMedX Neighborly Wellness, Endoanalysis founder of the Chip Talks podcast. He's a world leader in the theory of endocannabinoid system and human function order under that theory, with a deep passion for exploring the potential of the endocannabinoid system. Chip has dedicated his career to advancing our understanding of the crucial biological system. His expertise and leadership have been instrumental in bringing the Endoanalysis diagnostic test to life, empowering individuals to take charge of their well-being. Chip, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
Good, George. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited about this.
Me too. It's a wonderful time, and maybe we should give a little bit of respect to the one only Mark Davis, who is the unsung hero of so much of the plant medicine area. He's connecting so many people, and if you're listening to my voice right now, check out Mark Davis. He is an incredible connector, and he has helped so many people behind the scenes, and he doesn't get enough credit. So I want to throw that out there to him.
Completely agree with you. Yep. And thank you, Mark, for connecting us. So
Absolutely. So Chip, maybe you can give us a little bit of background, man. How did you get started on this? Is there something that pointed you in this direction? Have you been a lifelong learner, or give us a little bit of background on you?
Absolutely a lifelong learner. So always been a why guy, have a degree in mathematics. So it's just, I've always had an intellectual curiosity for all manner of things. In the 90s, I was got deeply into the free energy movement. I actually had some patents, wrote some patents around that. So I, got deep into that. But in, let's say about 2013, my wife and I were complete teetotalers, right? So we didn't drink alcohol. We didn't smoke cannabis. We were, health conscious kind of people, health focused people, but not as much as we are now, I would say. My wife and I had a 2-level spinal fusion, and I had a bad back, and we knew that, pain management was in our future. And again, this was 2013, so a long time ago. And we also knew that we didn't want to take opiates. We didn't want to take pharmaceuticals. And we knew that there was really I've subsequently found other things, but at the time I knew that there was really no herbal medicine that would kind of touch that pain. And so we went and tried cannabis in Colorado. And again, it was not a flip decision. I was a teetotaler. I hadn't used any, chemicals in 30 years. I was very proud of that. And so it was a very thoughtful decision, let's say, to try it. And marijuana worked. I would say it worked for our pain, both of our pain. It didn't work as well as some other things, that I've found since then. But it certainly did work, and it was enough to really open our minds and start me researching. And that started a big journey for me.
It's interesting to hear that sort of ideological transformation when you go from being the quote unquote teetotaler to trying something that you may be skeptical about and then seeing the results. That means you have to reanalyze all the previous thoughts. That means you have to go back and start looking at some difficult decisions that you may have made in your past. How did that work out for you?
Oh, every bit of reefer madness that has been stuffed in my head since,
Sure.
1968 or whatever, just went right out the window. Well, I guess they were lying to me. And then you begin to, well, why would they lie to me? And what source lied to me? And, it was a government source. And what, so as you begin to, unstrip, like, let's say, all of this stuff, that's kind of happened around this plant. And then, if you're intellectually curious, you go all the way back to the Flexner report, and you kind of realize, oh, well, they took over medicine in about the 1920s or 30s, cast out cannabis in every country in the world, and natural products, right? So, we've had some nefarious stuff, let's just say, happen. But, my mind wasn't really open to that until I kind of, let's say, lit that joint and, started that cannabis journey. But that journey, man, did that open my mind. And I started studying the I started right off, I was like, why does cannabis work? Why does it work for me? Well, it affects this system called the endocannabinoid system. I'm like, whoa, what's that all about? Well, it turns out that not only all mammals, anything with a spine has an endocannabinoid system. And in fact, even bacteria, some bacteria will have an endocannabinoid system. So I didn't know that then, but it got me intellectually curious. So I started researching, and, I found that this system that cannabis affects, but really, kind of has something to do with cannabis, but cannabis is a nice way to supplement it. Let's say it's a lot more than just cannabis, but it's our master regulatory system. It's involved in every single process, up and down regulation in your body. So that's a lot. And for some reason, the pharmaceutical industry is just either scared of it or completely wants you to not see it and stay away from it. So that really tripped my trigger. That got me excited. That got me asking the why questions, all that.
Yeah, it's such an interesting relationship of our relationship to medicine. And I used to be a smoker back in the day, and I who doesn't love a good cigarette after a few drinks? At least I did, and a lot of people in my family did. But it became a reckless habit. It became something that overtook me, and it's interesting to think of your relationship with tobacco. If you have a relationship with tobacco that's in the form of cigarettes, it usually seems to be in a destructive way, at least for me. But if you change your relationship to tobacco and maybe chew a tobacco leaf, that fundamentally changes the way your relationship is, not only with tobacco, but the way you use it, because you end up growing it and you see how it's grown. And it's so interesting how perhaps just the awareness of the endocannabinoid system changes your relationship not only to the plant, but changes the way you think a little bit. It's almost like an exogenous neurotransmitter. I know it's kind of a big topic, but maybe you could jump in to find a little nugget in there.
I think it kind of, I think it changes kind of the wiring in your brain almost, which is kind of an interesting thing. And I'm kind of a science guy, so I like to really stick to hard research, but there's a lot of hard research on the system. So a lot of, let's say, bench researchers, there's been some grants, but not many that have been led on the system, but a lot of, let's say, private money has been spent to research the system. So there's if you go, and I used to talk on this all the time. So, go out to PubMed and put in the word endocannabinoid, and, you're going to get hundreds of thousands of studies, which is great. But those studies help us map out and understand the system. But let me tell you what this system, so let me just kind of walk you through kind of what this system is, because it's so cool. So literally by the fats that you eat, we kind of set this spring, okay? So we kind of set a reaction spring inside of us, and you're going, what are you talking about? But I'll explain it in a second. So we're setting this reaction spring, okay? And again, if you eat, let's say, more omega-3 fatty acids than more omega-6 fatty acids, your spring is going to kind of be set anti-inflammatory. But all of us right now eat way more omega-6s than omega-3s. And so we have a real tight inflammatory spring that's set. Well, that spring would apply to, let's say, if you touched a hot stove, again, you're going to uncoil that spring. So you're going to have a reaction to that pain event. You're going to move away from that stove. Okay. How you dial back that reaction is the endocannabinoid system. So the endocannabinoid system can be excitatory, so it can help you do all that, but it really helps you dial back that event. Okay. So now let's look at kind of what's wrong with us right now. Again, we've set this inflammatory spring. So I touch the hot stove. Again, I move away from the stove, but my hand still hurts. And my hand still hurts 6 months later. And again, there's no damage or anything, but I haven't mitigated that pain because my spring is so set inflammatory, and I don't have the goodies to bring that all back, to complete that loop, to complete back, oh, I touched the hot stove, I move away, I'm fine now, see you later, bye. Same thing happens with fight or flight. If I come up behind you and drop a book, well, that invokes a reaction based on the spring that should be a little different than if I'm a lion and I come up behind you, right? So that's a completely different reaction. But your endocannabinoid system kind of helps you understand that and pull that reaction back to the proper level. So lion, not going to pull it back very much. Book, going to pull it back all the way. But if I'm depressed, if I'm anxious, and if that's part of my daily life, then that's a reaction, let's say, that hasn't been pulled back properly. again, your heart, any inflammatory reaction. So you can sort of apply this logic to kind of anything, but the endocannabinoid system is what helps us control these reactions that we're built to have. So like a cell, will have all these listening things on it. So it will have, GPRCs or, toll-like receptors. They'll kind of listen to the environment and kind of see what's going on. Well, again, if an event happens, certainly at a TLR4, which is an inflammatory thing, he's going to translate that event to that cell, and that cell's going to react. How that cell comes back into, let's say, normal function is going to be the endocannabinoid system.
Wow, it's mind-blowing to think what we're on the cusp of when we begin learning about this. Like it sounds to me, and from the small amount of research that I have done, that it has a radical effect on most behaviors.
Oh, yeah. It's your master regulatory system. So not just, most behaviors, but really any physiological change, that's happening inside your body is going to involve the endocannabinoid system. So like you can think of it as every cell, but even inside every cell, inside the mitochondria are organelles that live in cells that are what give us our energy. They're arguably where we hold intellect. They're arguably where God touches us. They're arguably our source of light. There are lots of cool things that are very important to study. But even a mitochondria will express a CB1 neuroreceptor. So we'll express a hook for the endocannabinoid system, and would have to, because you control energy status through this system. So all life, so it's, you begin to, so if you look at systematically kind of how we work, and, you're a complicated system, right? So it's way more, this gets way beyond DNA. Okay. So DNA is, if I'm a cell and I want to talk to my buddy over here who's another cell, I'm going to express a peptide or a piece of DNA or something and, talk to him and kind of tell him what I want to tell him. But that isn't how, how does cells in a liver know that they're supposed to be cells in a liver? That's not DNA. It doesn't work that way. So that works through something called biofields. And again, biofields will help us understand, will help cells understand how they're supposed to configure, where they're supposed to go. Like, how do you know where to put your heart in your body? I mean, that's a really interesting question, but it turns out through things like biofields. Okay. So there has to be some crossover between, let's say, biofield, mechanics and how all that works, and your real physicality, because a biofield is going to be more, let's say, spiritual, electrical, ethereal, frequency, all that kind of stuff. And, we obviously are physical beings. So there has to be a crossover, and, that can't be woo-hoo and magic. That has to be explainable. And it is explainable through the endocannabinoid system, which is cool. Yeah.
How, do we know, or maybe you could speak to the idea of how it becomes sort of excited? Like if I smoke a joint, is it instantly begin to shift regulation of certain receptors versus eating it? Or, maybe you could speak about the time from ingestion into, how does it work? Like how does it get stimulated? Like what happens? What's the interaction like?
Okay, so that's a great question. So let's talk about the system, and let me give you some examples of the system, and then we'll sort of throw THC in there, or what THC would do.
Yeah.
So your system, your endocannabinoid system, you can kind of think of as having a lake level. Okay, so it's got a natural amount of circulating, mediators that are useful. And your endocannabinoid system is like your master engineering system. So the more, let's say, surface area that I can get to express, and the more ability I have to control that surface area, well, the more management I'm going to have over you, right? And your body is a very complicated machine. If you just think about, eating, the process of eating. So, if you're eating, first of all, you've got to have communication. You have a master computer, hypothalamus, hippocampus. And you have to have communication between, your body has to know what you're eating. Why? Because your fat needs to know, hey, you know what? I'm good. I don't need anything else. I've stored all the fat that I can. Stop eating now, right? So there has to be communication with your fat. There has to be communication with your immune system, because your immune system is always trying to respond to stuff, and it needs to know how much horsepower it has. So do I have a lot of carbohydrates? Do I have a lot of proteins? Do I have a lot of fats? So I got to know, man, I got to know if I got some juice or not. Your stomach has to know, your pancreas has, you release 3 different types of enzymes for digestion, something for carbohydrates, something for protein, something for fat. The conformationally in your stomach, that looks completely different. So you've got to know what's coming before it gets there. Okay. So you have sensors, endocannabinoid sensors in your taste buds that will facilitate all this communication. So you have all of this communication all the time going on. If you're obese, so if you have obesity or metabolic syndrome, you've got too much of this communication and you can't signal through it. It's a problem. If you're autistic, you don't have enough of this surface area and control. And that's obviously manifest because, you have trouble controlling your neurology and all kinds of stuff. So the system is super important. So just right off the jump, if I find something that will supplement that system, that will raise my lake level, that's going to be beneficial. THC and CBD from cannabis will raise my lake level. So it gives me more access. I can use THC to offset my main guy in the endocannabinoid system called the anandamide. So he frees him up for use in other ways, right? Now we get into some really cool and interesting stuff. So let me take you through this through I used to say there are no fat hippies. Okay, so that's kind of changed now, right? So there are now some fat hippies, but there used to not. People who, let's say, chronically smoked cannabis usually did not have any kind of weight issues. Okay. Now, when you look at science, that flies in the face of what you learned about the endocannabinoid system, because the endocannabinoid system, if I stimulate it, it's going to make you hungry. It's going to make you super hungry. It's going to make you want to eat like right now. Okay. And we've all heard of the munchies, and we kind of all had had that experience. Anybody, if you take a high amount of THC, as you're coming down from that THC, you will want to eat and sleep. That happens to everybody. So it's a good way to stimulate hunger. But at the same time, you don't see any fat hippies. And so it bothered me. So I started studying this deeply. So THC, when you take THC, it will stimulate hunger. But if you take a lot of THC, it will do the exact opposite. It will kind of cut down hunger. And there's a reason for that in the signaling, let's say, of the endocannabinoid system. So that was a hugely long and sideways answer to your question. But cannabis supplements this system, and so it's very useful. But cannabis doesn't quite, like THC doesn't quite work the way an anandamide does. Other stuff in cannabis doesn't quite work the way that 2-AG does, which are your main kind of things in your endocannabinoid system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think it opens the door to a lot of interesting questions. We know that for a lot of people in my audience, the endocannabinoid system was brought into their idea of thought through cannabis. And maybe that's because people have read stuff about, remember I spoke with Emmy Robinson, and he has a daughter who's autistic, and he was able to use certain derivatives of cannabis and help ease those symptoms. And we've all heard of, Genevieve's Dream or Charlotte's Web or these things like that. But if you could speak to some of those studies, is that the anandamide working in there, or do we know what's happening in there, how it works with some of these symptoms? And is that a segue into other uses of the cannabinoid system? Or
Mike's a great guy. His story with autism is that's a great, and Genevieve, I think is her name. I can't remember her name, but yeah, that's a really, really good story. So, and again, it depends on the condition. So any of this stuff, it depends on the condition. And then you can't just throw, let's say, cannabis at everything. It's not the be all end all cure all. It does supplement this endocannabinoid system, which is our master regulatory system. So it's a way to, let's say, impact a whole lot of disease states, because this system is going to be involved. Like if you're having an inflammatory reaction, wow, is the endocannabinoid system involved in that, right? So it's, it's spinning. So you're going to be pulling resources, depending on how bad that inflammatory reaction is, that are engineering resources that you might need to do other stuff, right? So if you supplement into the system with cannabis, Now you're kind of able to fight your problem and also able to fight this ancillary problem because you supplement it in. So you've got enough juice, enough resources, to fight problems. In autism, autism is, again, absolutely part of the pathology of autism is a lower level of circulating endocannabinoids. So any autistic person will benefit from any kind of endocannabinoid that you put into that situation. So if you put CBDs into that situation, they're going to benefit a little bit more on the immune side. If you put THC, a little bit more on the control side. They're obviously not going to cure autism, but they will help that situation. They'll bring up that lake level where there's more control surface. Autism, I study very, very deeply. It is a very complicated disease. It's now looking like that has to do with a kind of a misconformed gut biome. So a gut biome, and we've known that gut biome's whacked out for a long time.
Yeah.
And you can't really solve the problem going at the gut biome. It's a complicated problem. On seizures, okay, so let's talk about seizures because we'll just sort of run through some of these diseases.
Let's do it.
So with Charlotte's Web, what happened was a little girl named Charlotte Figge. So her name was Charlotte Figge, and Charlotte had seizures, bad seizures. They gave Charlotte some CBD, and it was, I believe, CBD only. And the first time, if you're let's say if you've never been exposed to any cannabinoids, okay, the first time that you're exposed to CBD, it will impact two different receptor systems. So it will impact your CB1 receptor system and your CB2 receptor system. The CB2 receptor system is immune and also kind of has to do with seizures. CB1 is more control. Okay. So more your control and definitely has to do with seizures. Okay. So CB1 is kind of what you want to impact in a seizure situation. Well, if I first give you CBD right off, we'll hit CB1 and we'll alleviate that situation. So Charlotte's story goes that right off, CBD's helped her. She got rid of her seizures. It was great. But then her seizures started coming back. And that makes sense because she had tolerance to that CBD at CB1, and then she would need some THC. And that's exactly what happened. They started giving her some THC and her seizures cut back. So now Charlotte's Web, the solution that they sell has both CBD and THC in it for those very reasons. But they found that with seizures, and this is, lessons learned, let's say, this was not there wasn't any PhD involved in this. There wasn't any, medical science wasn't involved. It was literally just a kind of an anecdotal lessons learned, but they learned that THC was important, and then they put that in their product set. So, Charlotte's Web CBD will have some THC in it. So
I think that maybe this is one of the stumbling blocks for science, is that it's difficult to measure. Like, how do you measure what's actually happening in the brain? It's so complex, and there's all these different networks and neuroplasticity happening. And even though we see the results of someone having less seizures, which, I think that should be admitted as evidence. A lot of times we like to throw out things that are subjective, but if someone stops the problem, it's working. But how do you manage what you can't measure? Some people are skeptical, like, well, how do you know you add THC? How do you know it's this thing? Like, what do you say to that? To some of those people that are skeptical?
It's the way that science measures things benefits a business model, right? So it kind of, the pharmaceutical system is not going to measure things that doesn't benefit the pharmaceutical system. And they're not going to do it in ways that, they can't bill insurance for, right? It's just, that's their business, and no criticism. It's just the way they set stuff up. It's harmful, I would say, at times. So I will criticize it that way, but it is what it is. So are there better ways to, I think I hear you asking, are there better ways to test a human? Absolutely, there's better ways to test a human. Now, are these in the pharmaceutical system yet? No, but will they be? Yes. I'll tell you, I talk to pharmaceutical companies all the time about this stuff. And so they're curious, they're interested, they want to move the needle. But let me walk you through a couple of things that are really, really cool, that are kind of, let's say, current coming attractions, ways to measure the human body. So one is thermal imaging. So if you've ever seen thermal imaging, if you talk to a doctor, let's say, hey doc, I want to get a breast exam using thermal imaging, they're like, it's not good enough. Well, doc, it probably wasn't good enough 20 years ago when
Right.
you're in medical school, but gosh, have cameras gotten a lot better in the last 5 or 10 years. And man, have they gotten better. So, I can see a baby, in vitro, inside of a woman, with a thermal imaging camera now. So they're that good. But thermal imaging will help see mainly surface problems. But the big thing I can see with thermal imaging is if you're chronically inflamed, okay? And we all are. So if your lymphatic system is hot, you stand out like a lightning bug. So thermal imaging is really good for external, for breast cancer, for like back trauma, for knees, for, sports injuries, for all manner of external things. It also is a good indicator of chronic inflammation. And there's a way to measure how chronically inflamed you are, like, let's say,
Right.
Session A to session B with a thermal imaging camera, which is cool. So I can tell if I'm making progress, let's say, at your, chronic inflammation, by putting you through tests. The other cool instrument that we use, and we do this, we have a clinic that we have here in Oklahoma called Neighborly Wellness. And so we have these tools. We also use a tool called bioresonance. And bioresonance will view you in frequency. So it sort of analyzes you in frequency. And it turns out that if your heart is healthy and my heart is healthy, they're kind of broadcast on the same frequency. If they get off, again, there's just a kind of a database that's been built over time of, oh, well, if they're off this much, it means X, Y, Z. So, all organs have been mapped out now. But the really cool thing is if I know the kind of frequency of your heart and I know the frequency of a staph bug, I can see if those two interchange. So I can informationally at least see, if you have staph in your gut or your heart or whatever. And that really, most disease in the pharmaceutical system are really a list of symptoms, right? So what is rheumatoid arthritis? It's a symptom. What is cancer? It's a symptom. What is, XYZ? They're just symptoms. So the cause of almost all disease is oxidative stress. I mean, disease can be caused in different ways, but if you kind of look at oxidative stress, it's causal, right? So it can cause it can cause cancer, it can cause, it's infection, it's a core of infection. But most everything is caused by some insult. I say all the time, God is a perfect engineer. He didn't, design you to break. He didn't design you to screw up. He built you pretty perfect. And so if I get cancer, again, that's not God. That's something taking my function from doing this to doing this, from going up, let's say, to going down. And that something is it can be environmental. You can be allergic to something. You could live over lead mines. So it can be those things, but almost always it's pathogenic. And what I mean by pathogenic is it's a bacteria, it's a virus, it's a fungus, it's a parasite, hook around a pinworm. So bioresonance helps us identify what looks to be the core cause of things. And boy, does that help when you're trying to help somebody, when you're trying to suggest natural products or a cannabis treatment or even pharmaceutical treatments. Yeah. If I know what's at the bottom of your RA or your chronic, your bowel disease or, kind of your autoimmune or whatever it is, if I know what's at the bottom of that, then man, can I help you a lot? I can give you all kinds of information on how to help yourself. I can design natural products to help you. I can design cannabinoids to help you. So that's how medicine will change, and we're just at the beginning stages, I would say, of this measurement. I'll tell you, so I know you're going to ask me a question, but I'll tell you an extension of this in a second, which is really cool.
Yeah, let's hear
it. So this really extends into, I would say, what Tesla was seeing, what Royal Rife was seeing, kind of this body electric, but it's a little bit more than that. And again, if I can view you as an electric entity, as a kind of we have biofields. Biofields form first, and then you sort of form your DNA around a biofield, and then you form matter around that DNA. And so you sort of are constructed from the ground up through these biofields. Well, these biofields are frequency driven, and I'll kind of give you a real world practical example of why this is important. So COVID, we all know about COVID. And so COVID gets into us by, we get something on our hands, we touch our face, and it works its way into us through our respiratory system. And in particular, it'll enter through a receptor called ACE2, so ACE2. And so a real good strategy is to block block ACE2. And that is prophylactic. That's preventative against COVID. That will help COVID from spreading if you already have it. So it's, it's how HCQ works. It's how ivermectin works. It's why CBDA will work. It's why THCA will work. CBGA will work, because they all, licorice will block this. Wormwood will block this. So lots of things in nature will block that receptor. But this is a really cool thing. So this is called the resonant recognition model of science. And these researchers found out that a receptor will, how does a receptor and a ligand find each other? Well, they do so through frequency. So they broadcast on the same frequency. And it turns out a receptor is just phase shifted, 180 degrees from the broadcast of the receptor. So that's how you know if something's a lock or a key, let's say. And so they same frequency, but just phase shifted. So what these resonant recognition model of science guys decided to do was to see if they could block ACE2 just in frequency. Okay, and real easy thing to test. You throw COVID at it, see if COVID will get in or not. And it turned out they were able to block this receptor in frequency, which is crazy sauce. But again, it all goes back to this bioelectric kind of model of human function. So med beds, things like that, those are coming. Those are, a very real thing that I would say exist in theory now, that can easily exist in practice as soon as somebody kind of funds that venture. So lots of cool stuff coming.
Man, it's mind-blowing to me. On the topic of frequency, like, how is that measured? Does everybody's heart frequency have like a medium range from high to low that hovers? I mean, is a frequency sort of like a thumbprint in that it's unique to everyone? Or is there like a window of which different frequencies from different organs and different health resonate?
So this is a deep rabbit hole.
I know.
Yeah, to everything that you said. So you have all these different frequencies inside of you. All right. So let's kind of take it from the ground up.
Okay.
So mitochondria will produce ATP, and again, it's all about movement. Okay. It's all about sound. It's all about banging on this table at a certain rate of movement. And this is what Tesla saw. Something called scalar waves or longitudinal waves. So again, if I have a tuning fork and I resonate this tuning fork, and I have the same key tuning fork, he will resonate in sympathy. I don't even have to do anything to him, with no power loss, none. If I go up an octave, I get, same key, but up an octave, I get power loss, but I still get resonance. So that's cool stuff. And that's really how you work. So let's talk this through. So mitochondria, again, they're producing ATP, and they produce ATP. I just pulled up this study. I'm like, I wonder if ATP I wonder if mitochondria would produce ATP at the rate of, visible light. Wouldn't that be cool? And it turns out they do. They're literally right in the range of, so the frequency of ATP production, it can change. It depends on if you're burning sugar, burning fat, or burning light. So it can change. It's variable. That's why you need a CB1 receptor on your mitochondria, so you can change it, by the way, control it. So that there's endocannabinoid system for you, rearing its head always. But, so if you're running sugar, it's not quite this high, but if you're running on fat, you are producing ATP literally at the rate of visible light, the same frequency as visible light that comes from the sun. Isn't that pretty cool? And then it looks like you take that resonant frequency, and a cell is, let's say, a resonant cavity. So it will have its own, if that little heart's beating at the frequency of the sun, it's going to have the frequency of the sun. But then it can conformationally change its frequency by like gluing little things on its cell membrane. And that's exactly what happens. What conformational changes happen within a cell when it gets hit by a neuroreceptor. So if I hit a CB1 neuroreceptor that's on the edges of the outer membrane of that cell, it will cause phosphorylation. It will cause conformational changes inside that cell that will change the frequency of that cell. So it looks like basically a cell will take this mitochondrial sun energy and step it down in frequency and use it to do all kinds of different things, to signal to its buddies, to do all kinds of different things. if you study something called G coupled, protein receptors, but they transmit through something called GTP. So it's guanine triphosphate and guanine, diphosphate and monophosphate are how, the cells can signal to each other through this system. But that cells will have action at a distance. So I can hit your taste bud receptor cells and cause immediate conformational change in your pancreas, So you have all this action at a distance. But it is so cool how you work. It's easy to explain and it's very logical. And I don't know why we make it way more difficult, really than it is. And we do all the time.
Yeah, I'm so thankful to get to see sort of the holistic approach to medicine making a re-entry into the world. I was speaking with Erica Dick not too long ago, who's an incredible researcher out of Canada on psychedelics and plant medicines and the history of them. And we were speaking about the way in which in the late 50s and early 60s, medicine was much like today beginning to unlock the power of different sort of plant medicines. And specifically in this example, she was talking, I think it was about psilocybin. And we got kind of into the weeds about the questionnaires that they asked the people. And the reason I bring it up is it was so much more, they incorporated the family into the idea as if the medicine was working. And like on the questionnaire, they would go to the family and be like, is your husband less of an asshole? Like that was one of the ways in which you would see if it worked. And if you look at the world today, it's like, it seems like we're kind of absent of some of these subjective results. And it's like, what can you measure? And I think that speaks to what you said earlier about the idea of science having been corrupted by company science, where it needs to form a patent, it needs to be marketable, and if it's not, then we're not going to look at it. But do you see this sort of returning back, and I guess maybe that's why it got so complicated, and now that we're reincorporating, the thermal imaging, or we're reincorporating, it's getting easier to understand, it's making more sense.
Yeah. Well, let's walk everybody through that,
Okay.
kind of what happened, because it helps to know the history. So you had medicine in, let's say, 1900. So the year 1900 was awesome. You had all different kind of avenues of medicine. So you had kind of this electric medicine that is this bioelectric field that's now just reemerging. But, Tesla and these guys were playing around with it at that time. So you had kind of a bioelectrics. You had obviously natural products. So you had a ton of natural product stuff going on. You had people using hemp and using cannabis, but you also had people using all manner of different herbs, spices, all different kinds of things for health. You had just, all different aspects of medicine. Well, these business guys, so Carnegie Mellon and Rockefeller came along, and we could probably make a business out of that, and it'd probably be good. Everybody needs health stuff, so let's grab a model and let's force everybody into a model. And so they wrote this thing called the Flexner Report, and the Flexner Report said that the way to do medicine. So all you guys are just cranks and charlatans. The way to do medicine is the Bayer model. Now, Bayer was part of IG Farben. IG Farben was, made Xylon gas that, killed a lot of Jewish people, did a lot of other evil. But, so Bayer was part of that. So they go, well, Bayer is the model. So we want all medicine to look like Bayer. And what that means is that we're going to use one molecule to solve problems. So every drug will be one molecule, right? So one synthetic. It will be, and we'll characterize it by one thing. And we'll be able to do dosing because it's just one thing. And, it's easier to do it because it's one thing. So that's the model that we still operate under now. So if you want to go do drug development, so if I want to go work for Pfizer calls Chip, hey, we want you to go do drug development on the endocannabinoid system. It's going to be a one, molecule model. And that doesn't work. Nature doesn't work that way. Nature will present sophistication in every single plant that she presents to us. And so cannabis has, it's just lots and lots, let's say, of chemical constituents that are medicinal, but that's the way that nature is presenting that to us. And what we found, at least in our anecdotal, is I'm way better off, with a whole plant turmeric or a whole plant cannabis, because that's the way nature designed it. rather than going to a synthetic, pharma, or rather than going even to a single molecule. Now, as we understand this better, what we've started doing is actually getting these isolates, because we understand what they do, like a limonene or a pinene, from cannabis, or a CBD or CBG or THC, and beginning to, kind of do the pharma exercise, because we understand the impacts we want to have into the endocannabinoid system. So this taking multiple things and engineering is a very, very new thing for pharmaceutical sciences. I actually hold the first issued patent on
Yeah.
doing that, yeah, for the endocannabinoid
Congratulations.
system. So engineering.
Yeah, it seems when you start having lots of variables, you really change the equation. In some levels, I think I understand the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but it seems like the further we move away from the idea that we don't come into this world, we come out of it, like on some level. It seems like medicine is like, okay, we're separate from the planet. So take this one thing, but just like you said, if the plant is giving us this particular medicine and it has all these chemical constituents, like that's probably the way we should be taking it. Like we're part of the system, right? Do you think that there's a resemblance to the problems we have in medicine with a resemblance to the problems we have about our relationship to nature?
Oh, 1000%. Man, did you just ring the bell? If you look at the big picture, and I don't know why this is, but scientifically, if you look at just our relationship to the sun,
Yeah,
okay, the relationship to the sun. So we are intimately tied to the sun. Energetic exchange.
yeah,
Your body literally will go through different processes every day, based on where the sun is. So we're intimately tied with the sun. Clearly, everything on Earth is, there's no life without the sun. There's no plants without the sun. So, and that is so occulted. Your
yeah,
relationship to the sun is so occulted. Your relationship to nature is so occulted. But we need to bring back nature. In my mind, just medically, God built us a great system. It's
yeah,
right out there in nature, and it's incumbent on us to discover it, figure it out, work it. But man, we have so much data there. It's we could solve. Almost. I won't say never as a scientist do you make ultimate statements,
sure.
but we could solve most, let's say, human problems, human disease with nature right now. And we're not, because we're so wrapped around the axle about the system that we're using and the way that we've been taught to use that system, that it blinds us
Yeah.
to the obvious. And that's, interesting.
It's so interesting, and when I pull out my copy of the DSM-5, I don't really see any sort of real diseases. I see symptoms that are manifested through the way we live our lives. You look at anxiety or depression, it's this concept of our relationship with time, and the answer is nature. I'm not saying it will cure everything, but having a different outlook, having a different relationship with nature changes your relationship to it. And a really good life example of that is anybody who's really taken like a high dose, maybe cannabis, or for me it was psychedelics, but it fundamentally changes the way you see yourself in relationship to the planet. And when you do that, the stress, the PTSD, that stuff is manageable. Not only is it manageable, but now you have a strategy to solve it because you see it for what it is. It's your understanding of your relationship. And so these plants are trying to speak to us. On some level, I think it's a language. I think it's nature speaking to us. Maybe is it too far of a stretch to say that the endocannabinoid system is a system which lets us communicate with nature?
No, I don't think so at all. I think it's a system, it's a, let's say, physiological system that helps us understand the importance of nature, because it
Right?
is absolutely a natural driven
Yes.
system. To your point, what you just said is so important. In my study, I think that we need to nutrient ourselves, but it's not nearly as much as we think. So I think we really don't have to eat. I think we could, and eating is very energetically
Mhm.
costly, right? So you can look at fasting and fed and
Yeah.
intermittent fasting and all that, but eating is the most damaging and costly thing that we do to ourselves every day. So can we do that with less impact? Well, likely we can drink our nutrients. And the other thing that we don't understand is how much nutrient we get every day from the sun, from actual, ultraviolet radiation that we're receiving from the sun. So I'm kind of that mind. But if you look at, and religions are good ways to code information, let's just say. And so, every religion has something about fasting in it, doesn't it? Which is fascinating. But then you look at, like, how did man, in Christianity, how did man fall? Well, again, we ate, and again, I just walked you through that. So again, if I cause you to eat, it's I'm going to cause you to drop your immune system. You're going to be pathogenically infected. You're going to have chronic inflammation. You're going to have disease. You're going to have all kinds of stuff. If I can kind of keep you from eating somehow, nutrient you're not going to have any of those problems. So again, we ate, and is that figurative or actually real? And then we put on clothes. And when we put on clothes, what did we do? We stepped right out of nature, didn't we?
Yeah, we began to separate ourselves from the very thing that will probably free us on some level.
Yep. So nature has all energy moves, let's say, in a song, in a note. All of the cells inside of you, they have to collect to form organs and do all kinds of stuff. So you can think of it as like a big symphony, right? So it's a big symphony, and your hypothalamus hippocampus is kind of the conductor in that symphony. Cancer is, the flutes are out of tune or whatever, right? And disease really is that. So it's part of the symphony that's just not playing along with the tune. Nature is the same way. This is musical. Energy moves in musical patterns. There's a guy named Walter Russell, The Ultimate One. That's a great book that talks about how energy moves. Good luck understanding it. But he says that energy moves in 7 notes to an octave, lots of octaves in nature. So if you look at frequency, and if you study frequency, so we were talking about frequency before and the different frequencies in your body. So you've got a heart frequency that's, 1 beat a second. You've got this mitochondrial frequency that's fast. You've got all different kinds of, let's say, things that are keeping tune in you that have to all communicate. So you have all these different frequencies and all these different bands from, 0 hertz to tetrahertz, petahertz, all the way up. Where these intersect, you can think of a bunch of rocks thrown in a pond, right? A lot of, let's say, ripples in a pond. There's going to be places where those ripples cross over that are really important energetically. Those would be, in quantum mechanics, those would be called coherent interference. So there's places where these standing waves will interact with each other to cause coherent interference. The current thinking is physically we're nothing more than coherent interference. And so, gosh, there's a lot there, so can you get in the middle of that? Yeah. Can you, change that with frequency? Can you look at what cancer looks like under that model and map? So med beds, the technology of the future, you'll be evaluated in frequency, and that kind of exists now. It's not good enough yet, but the underpinnings of that exist in technology called bioresonance. So bioresonance is a really cool way to do it. Bioresonance claims it will treat you like Rife. It's not good enough yet. I'll tell you right now, you might get lucky, it might work, but it doesn't have the degree of accuracy that you need to do that yet. But it will in the future. And so that whole technology, is stunning to me, and probably the, technology of the future, the medical technology of the future. But how do we get from, point A, where we still have traditional doctors, traditional researchers who are trained under this Flexner report model, that don't even consider natural products. So how do we get those guys from point A to point B? Because they're not being lied to, but it's like they're being told half truths and misdirection. And gosh, if we could educate those guys, this would all move faster. So I'm that's my tilt at my windmill is, how do we change this system? How do we educate these guys better? How do we put out information that, they can glom onto when they're ready? How do we change the regulatory? How do we, in government, how do we create situations that are more open to these kind of ideas rather than closed? And are there ways to do that? And it turns out there are. Some of them cost money, some of them don't, but there's lots of ways to influence, that really, as long as I can, get your ear for a second, then, I've got a way to influence you. So.
Yeah, it's so true. You could argue that that's what's happening now on some level. When I look at so much chaos that's been happening in the world, sometimes it takes a real crisis for a new sort of emergence, and isn't it interesting that there is this resurgence in plant medicines at this time? It's almost like the planet is providing us with the remedy we need to solve the calamities that are happening around us. But it's poetic, like you said. It's in tune with nature. There must be this cycle of death so that we can have this reemergence and reframing of the narrative, this re-understanding, this rebirth, the same way that the caterpillar or the butterfly breaks free from the detritus and moves its wing for the first time, or a snake shedding its skin. Like, I see that happening with the world around us, the wars and the aging demographics of people. So too are these old ideas beginning to die, and these new ideas that have, maybe they're just recycled ideas, but they're coming to the forefront. And the people like yourself that are bringing these into the hands of the people that make policies, like, that's the beginning, I think, of this new system that's emerging. What do you think about that?
Yeah, completely agree with you. If you think about consciousness and what is consciousness, and kind of, what we are, and would a cell have consciousness? Well, it's alive.
Yeah.
So at some level, cells get together and form a liver. Would they have consciousness? Yeah, likely they would. That liver consciousness in me would add to my overall chip consciousness. But here's where it gets really cool. Okay. So if you and I are like-minded about something, we're going to form a collective, and that collective is like almost a new being. Okay. So that collective could have spiritual, energy, and, if enough of us got together, let's say a nonprofit, to do things, then we would have form and function, and that it would be almost like a living entity, that thing that we formed. Well, let's say our world collective is super important, right? It probably will, designate how the planet goes, what the planet thinks, and the planet has its own collective. I believe that, again, that we're part of that planet's collective. I firmly believe that you and I did not have control of this collective 10 years ago. I believe that our collective was we'd gone to sleep. We'd ceded our collective to, movies, TV, influencers, government, all these institutions. So we just completely were giving away our power to these institutions. Yeah, we'll let them worry about it. We don't care. And by virtue of doing that, we allowed these institutions to drive our future, to set a tone for where we really want to go, all of us. I think what's happening right now is we're waking up. We're beginning to, and why? I think it has to do with the sun, honestly, but we're all kind of waking up right now, and we're realizing, wow, we have a lot more power than we thought we have. And if you just look at MAGA, so you may or may not agree with MAGA, the MAGA movement. That's a force, man. That has collective consciousness. That's its own being. That's its own cat that almost can't be stopped now, which is interesting, right? So we lost control of our collective, but you could argue that MAGA is an attempt to get that back. Kind of the Q movement, if you're familiar with that. The Q movement that's what Q is our collective. So that's an attempt, to get that back, to take back control of that. So I can't really have a vote in that collective unless I'm awake, unless I can discern, unless I can kind of make, second, third, fourth level decisions where I was just making a quick impulsive decision, right? So I think we're going through this process. I think nature is screaming at us to wake up because we're destroying the planet, because these evil shitbags that have had control of our, Q have taken it that, military and master slave, and, these wrong kind of ideals that most of us don't agree with and wouldn't agree with if we weren't asleep. So, and I think we're right on the tipping point of wow, changing all that. And I think when we decide we want to change all that, when our cue gets strong enough to say, yeah, we want to change all that, that's not what we want. All of us don't want that. We want a different kind of world, that we'll begin to replace these institutions.
Yeah.
So these institutions are useful, but they've controlled and enslaved us. I'm now seeing how the pharmaceutical industry is falling, with COVID-19 and a lot of things. And they're just, that industry is falling. And now you have this new emerging kind of natural products and cannabis industry beginning to emerge, right? And can those two worlds come together? Yeah, they should, and they need to. Schedule 3 changes in marijuana will completely open that door, where those two worlds come together. But we need to find ways to put those two worlds together, because that will rebuild, this institution proper, where it properly respects you, it, properly respects nature, it uses nature proper. And I think we're doing that. I mean, I think I'm a change agent there. That's how crack smoky I am.
I saw this. I used to work a lot on the campus of University of Hawaii, and back in this one main office, there was way in the back, there was this sculpture, and it was like a life-size sculpture, and on one side there was a human figure made out of e-waste, like robot parts. And it was, and in the middle, on the other side, there was a human figure made out of branches and trees and shrubbery and stuff. And they were really well formed, like real humans. And they were on a mirror. There's a mirror between them, and they were both pushing on that mirror. And I used to sit at that particular sculpture and just look at it. And I just thought to myself, like, wow, this has been going on for so long. And maybe you could even look at the caduceus. I think that's what it's called, with those snakes coming up the pole, with these two forces. And when I look at modern day science and I read some of the research that's coming out of like the RNA technology, like a beautiful idea to reprogram the body to create antibodies to destroy inflammation or to destroy disease. But it just seems like such hubris to me. Like, you're going to re-engineer this creation. You don't need to re-engineer that creation. And it seems like there is this battle between biology and technology on some level, but it is the balance of those two that I think put us in harmony. Maybe we're back to resonance, maybe we're back to frequency, but right now they seem out of line. They're competing against each other when they don't need to. They need to be in balance with one another. What do you think on the idea of that kind of technology versus biology race we're in, like an arms race almost?
Yeah, no, in the whole, I'm going to occult, light from
please.
you. That whole, let's say, line of thinking wants to glorify man, over God, right? And so that appears to be, the prevalent thinking in the leadership of a lot of these institutions, is to glorify man over God. And so, that's how they think. I mean, that, we got CERN, trying to make a, black hole, somewhere in Switzerland. Well, wouldn't it be better? Wouldn't it be easier to just, study black holes and just study how God made a black hole and what God's processes are there and how nature works? To me, that seems more logical than trying to make a black hole. Everything and again, I think we're all, certainly most of your audience, I know you are pretty hip to the idea, let's say, that, our world is controlled, we're kind of run by this, evil group of people, let's say. And they sit above government and all that. Well, what's the agenda of these people? Well, it sure looks like in every single institution that they've created, it's to corrupt God. And it's to corrupt, and what I mean by, I don't mean, like, let's say, the Christian notion of God. I am talking about the scientific notion of God that is provable, that you can prove literally by a relationship with the Son. So that's something that you can't see. The light, that actual scientific relationship that you have with God, that I'm not going to let you see that. I want you to see me. I want you to see me as a man, and I want you to glorify me, and then you can be my slave. And that's kind of the way that we've, done stuff. But I think that's all breaking. If you're a Book of Raw guy, right? So I'm completely there. But Book of Raw is some channeled old information that I think happened in the 80s or 90s. But it turns out it's kind of really interesting information that says that we're in this density that we're in right now. We're kind of the dilemma is service to self or service to others, right? So I'm either going to be somebody who's concerned about my fellow man, I'm concerned about nature, I want to kind of do everything that we're talking about, bring these natural, processes and glorify God, so I'm a guy that wants to glorify God. So that's service to others, or I can be a service to self guy. And that means, I'm going to be all about me and my stuff. And that looks like the way that we've constructed our society. I mean, if you look at corporations, it's you're a slave to your boss until you become a boss, and then you get slaves. So it's everything is constructed in our society in this master slave way. Again, I think this is all changing. I think we're flipping this around, and that's some of that information would indicate that that is the case. And there's a lot of other things that would indicate that's the case. What do you think of that, George? I'd be interested in what you think of that.
Yeah, I see the awakening as an uprising, and even before COVID, you had the Yellow Vest movement, you had the uprisings in the Middle East, the Middle East Spring, and I think that the people that run the institutions, predominantly the monetary institutions, had lost control back in 08. And everything since 08 has sort of been a patch on the system. I went back and I read there's some interesting Federal Reserve papers that you can read. One was when Alan Greenspan was getting grilled by Congress, and he says something along the lines of, there was a flaw in my ideas about money. And you realize that there's zero consequences for someone who completely brought down a system while all of his friends got enriched. And you go, wow, what happened there? And you start looking at the way in which Occupy Wall Street had people in positions of authority and old money families running for the hills. And we got to do something. And it wasn't just in the US, it was everywhere. And it's been happening everywhere and everywhere since, and I think that was one of the awakening had been happening for quite some time. We saw forerunners in like Tesla and like great men. I think that these were the first to be awakened, and all of a sudden now more and more people are being awakened. And there's this momentum that the old world, the old system is dying. And the lifeblood of the old system was this idea of money. That idea of money is dying. And that's why there's so much war right now. When I look at Iran, I see people standing up to a bully. I see them like, we're not going to take this anymore. I see them like, I remember I worked in a corporate job for 26 years, and I got to the point where I was so demoralized. I was treated like a piece of garbage, like a number. And the more that I stood up, the more flack I got. The more I stood up, the more flack I got. I said, no, this is wrong. And I stood up for myself because I didn't want my daughter to have to do it. And I thought, if I don't stand up more, then she has to do it. And so does everybody in my work that's fed up but is too afraid to say something. I'll say something for them. And you realize when you start fighting, you start getting it further and further to the top. It's not a bug, it's a feature. People want you they want you shameful. They want you to feel as if you're inferior. They want you to feel like there's no hope. And that is BS, bullshit, man. There's plenty of hope out there. And the real courage comes when you find that nugget of sunlight, that nugget of truth, that nugget of belief in yourself. And you breathe on that ember. And it grows and it pulls people towards you, and your relationship with your wife gets better, and your kids get better, and your neighbors you start seeing this thing grow inside of you, and it begins to burn. And that's what's been happening. And so many of these small embers have become flames around the world. And what looks like chaos to the people controlling the narrative looks like freedom to everybody who's been slaving under this system that doesn't work for people anymore. And there's no stopping it. But things might get bad. Will people turn to a limited nuclear strike? Maybe, but they're just going to, the more it's like that Chinese finger trap. The more they wrestle away, the tighter it gets. Like, people should come to grips now. People in positions of authority should come to grips with, your system is over. Start looking at how to make a better system for everybody else. But I think there's a lot of pain. Like, there's going to be there's going to be a financial calamity of which we haven't seen, at least in my lifetime as a Gen X. Like the whole stock market's gonna crash, everything's going away. And it's scary, but as soon as you come to that idea of like, okay, what if it does? Well, you're still here. You still have people that love you. You know, we're gonna find out what matters. Like I see the crisis coming, and I'm hopeful that there's enough of us to stop it from really happening. But on some level, I'm happy to see that system go. It doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve you. It doesn't serve our kids. It doesn't serve the rest of the world. It doesn't serve the average person. The entire system is propping up a handful of arrogant, condescending people that don't care about the world.
A complete man. Wow, are we like-minded and completely agree with the way that you see it? I think just by our force of will, we're breaking down the the wall. And I agree with you that it's been changing for a while.
Yeah.
And I see in my little silo, I see it in health. But to your point, you hate to say this to people because it kind of freaks people out, but you're mistaught about we're not taught anything about how to run our immune system, right?
Right.
And again, I can teach you in 5 minutes how to run your immune system. Intermittent fast is the biggest thing, but that gives you an immune system. But if you're fed all the time, your immune system's going to be down. So you're going to get pathogens, you're going to get some infection, and you're going to become sick from that infection. It may take 10 years, it may take 5, it may take 1, it may take 30. But I can make you sick just by not teaching you about your immune system. And then I can add all these soaps and detergents and EMF and 5G and all these things that also impact your immune system. And I can just make you even more vulnerable. So now I've controlled you, slave. I've limited your life. I've basically, I know how much you're going to earn. I know how much you're worth as a medical thing. So I've completely controlled you. Yep. By being bad. And so it looks like almost everything in our society, even the cereal that we eat, even the detergents that we use, are designed to kind of wreck your immune system, make you sick, to enslave you. And you hate to think that way, but boy, is it obvious to me.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one too. When you look at addiction, whether it's some people get addicted to alcohol or addiction can be to drug use. Isn't it interesting that the world of business has used the model of addiction to create a system that promotes their business? And a good example is Xerox. Xerox will give you the copier for free, but then they'll sell you the toner. Every good drug dealer knows the first one's always free. First one's always free. You know what I mean? Here, you need some more? Come on over here. But it's interesting to think about it from that angle, how our business models echo our disease models.
You're absolutely right. And addiction is everybody, so a lot of people out there listening to this podcast will go, addiction's a big problem. Thank goodness it doesn't touch me. Yeah, stop eating sugar.
Yeah, right.
just stop eating sugar. Yeah, go for it, man. And again, I tell this story all the time. So Peruvians for thousands of years have chewed coca leaves, right? So they chew coca leaves, and it's just part of their culture. Nobody gets addicted. Nobody's, I'm sure people chew them too much and stuff, but it's just part of their culture and part of they do it for energy. It's like drinking coffee. There are people who drink too much coffee. So people chew coca leaves. But if I take that coca leaf and I refine the cocaine out of it to a delicate powder, and then I start sniffing that's harmful. That's addictive, right? So it's going to cause all kinds of problems. So if something from nature can be very nice and benign and work very well. If I take that and synthesize it, now I have something that's horribly addictive. These people are experts at doing that. And, go try to mess with a sugarcane plant in Hawaii and see how far you get. Go look at the ownership of sugar plant plantations in Hawaii, and see if you can get to really who owns those. You'll end up at Blackwater and places like that, which are interesting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating to think about the way in which so much of our health depends on what we consume and narrative control, and how all these things have frequency. When I think about language or fear, how do you think that those two things can work together to either boost the immune system or the endocannabinoid system, or decrease the immune system? Or is there a relationship between language, fear, and health, in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're just, let's say, energetically, vibrationally, kind of fear is the lowest, let's say, expressing emotion. So if you're always fearful, then you're going to be, let's say, as a being operating at a lower frequency than if you're always grateful. So
Yeah.
gratitude would be the exact opposite of fear. And, finding gratitude in a fearful situation is that's a spiritual gem, if you can
Yep.
do that. So and that'll turn around a lot of situations. But frequency is so important in kind of how we function. It's going to be such an important part of all discussions in the future. But there's a way that it works. And again, I don't know everything about it. I don't think I know more about it. Let's say that I'm a 1%er there for sure, but we don't have it figured out the way that we need to have it figured out. So it's looking like there'll be different, like, long wave frequencies that do certain things like to you physically, and then more quick hitting, like petahertz, terahertz frequencies that do other things to you, and cellularly how cells communicate. So that how cells are communicating with each other, again, is a frequency thing that you can get in the middle of. So you could block that. So you could block the, let's say, action at a distance of cells if you wanted to. There's just so much there. It's like it's kind of like we've been taught a overly complicated. It's like if I taught you about your car and said, hey, I'm going to teach you about your car, but let's start with how combustion works, and internal valve pressure, and oxygen to fuel mixture ratios, and the mathematics of that.
Yeah.
Let's start with all that in order to teach you how your car works. And that's kind of the way that physicians are taught now. And it's brilliant how these, let's say, evil people have constructed this society, but it is all falling down. So let me give you this. You'll love this.
Please, let's hear it.
So if you go around the world, there's a certain architecture, let's call it Greco-Roman architecture, that's very prevalent around the world. And again, the first people that came to Quebec, so the first 100 people or 500 people that came to Quebec apparently built a giant Greco-Roman cathedral, a giant Greco-Roman university, a giant Greco-Roman town hall with 500 people. And that was the first thing that they did. So you can find these buildings all over the world. All right. All over the world. You can find them in Africa. But the cool thing is when you look at the churches, okay, and what they call churches now, I don't think they were called churches then. I think we had this tech. I think we've fallen from a way higher civilization. I think we went to sleep. I think we knew how to live close to nature. We knew how to live close to God. But anyway, in these churches, first of all, if you look at those old churches, they look like speakers, don't they? So they all will have the same features in their front configuration and sides, just like a speaker, okay? Just like something that's built to promote acoustic sound. Now, when you look at the old organs, those old organs, if you look at, let's say, how light moves. So light is this giant frequency, and we see this much of light, okay? So there's this vast spectrum, let's say, of frequency that you can equate it to light or sound or however you want to, but sound is kind of a tight frequency. Light is a big one. It looks like these organs were meant to play all of these different notes and all of these different octaves to hit this broad frequency spectrum, right? And likely they were done. Why would you do that? For musical enjoyment? Likely not. To me, those look like hospitals.
Interesting. Bringing us back to frequency and light.
And sound. In the beginning,
sound.
In the beginning, there was the Word was God, God is the Word, so that's pretty clear. And literally, the spoken word is important because you are creating frequency. Anything that, it's really interesting. The Bible is an interesting book. There's some interesting stuff that was dug up in the 40s, I think. So the Nag Hammadi, whenever that was, Dead Sea Scrolls, 40s or 50s. The bad guys didn't have a chance to alter it before we got to it. So there's some interesting stuff in there. But there's called Secret Book of John. So the Apocrypha of John or Secret Book of John. And it tells a little bit different and more vast creation story. It's really, really an interesting story, but it's a little bit broader, let's say the Adam and Eve story. But one of the things that it talks about is when this realm was created, the first thing that it did was move. It says it moved. It's like, why would you put that in there? Well, when something moves, it creates frequency. It begins to create frequency. If you define life, I kind of got to this with, wouldn't have a good definition of life right now, membrane and potential maybe. So it would be that basic. But if you look at cancer, so cancer absolutely, we know now, can be formed from a pathogen. So pathogens, bacteria, and certain things will cause cancer. So does that mean all cancer is pathogenic? No, because we also know that, radiation, so, Hiroshima type radiation will cause cancer as well. So what's the commonality between those two things? Well, it turns out it's DNA. And so both of those things do something called adduct. So they'll sort of glom on things to DNA. So they'll adduct DNA, and DNA is a big antenna. It's just a big, basically quantum antenna. And so when you adduct DNA, you're changing the frequency that it's able to receive. Well, cancer, no doubt, is alive. It makes decisions. It avoids your immune system like crazy. So it's alive. Well, does just abducting DNA create life? Maybe. So now we get to some really interesting questions about life and what is life. If you talk to these bioelectric guys, they're going to tell you anything with potential that's got a membrane in between it, boop, 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 will create frequency and will create life, right? So we don't even have a good definition of life right now. That's how much we need to recast the current system.
Yeah, it blows my mind to think about. On some level, we feel like we're so advanced in so many ways, but all of our technology, it seems like all of our tax dollars goes to technology to build war machines. Like that's all, like, is that like the highest achievement of man, is building weapons? Is that all we can do? When I start looking, I think that people's relationship to plant medicines is one of the fastest ways they can begin to see a more clearer picture of reality. And I know that maybe the death of my son and plant medicine coincide with each other, but that's when I began to see how much just real bullshit is out there. And when you think about the term of history, you think to yourself, like, whose history? My history or my friend from Japan's history? My history or the people in Palestine's history? My history or the people in Iran's history? Like, whose history are we talking about? And then you realize, like, just look at the word history, his story. Like, so much of history is just under the guise of someone's story. Like, the subjective nature of history means that almost everything is bullshit on some level. And it forces you to start living your life in accordance with a better way, I think. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Like if I'm let's say I'm an evil, with these evil people that are, they're generationally evil. They've been around for a long, long time. If I'm one of these evil people and I want to control the world, one of the problems that I have are indigenous peoples, right? So you've got, likely, I know from a textbook that I have in 1900 that geography was taught around 5 indigenous races of man. I think that's fascinating. So if I know I've got an indigenous race, let's say in Russia, or I've got an indigenous race in Africa, those people are living close to nature. They have for many years. They're connected to the land. They're connected to their culture. They're connected to nature. They've, hundreds, thousands of years. They've sort of culturally developed this. I've got to wreck that right off. I can't have that in my evil world. I can't have people, I can't have them. They're connected to nature, not me. So I've got to wreck that. And so I've got to start these mass migrations. And if you look in history at when that started, again, it's all of this stuff kind of started around the same time, so I've got to move these indigenous, I've got to create a war or something. I've got to disrupt this indigenous situation. Then I've got to keep it disrupted where these indigenous people don't ever find their traction and footing with God and nature again. Okay. And so look at Africa. I mean, Africa is the best, kind of in, within a couple of generations here of what's happened. So Africa's, completely, the indigenous people have been starved, have been diseased, have been wiped out. So you've, wrecked that whole indigenous connection to the land. The last bastions of that are kind of Peru and, the Andes, right? And where you still have some people clinging to, that old, even in Native, I'm Chickasaw, I'm a Chickasaw card holder, I'm Native American. Even our people, we can't, the current situation, I won't go to our tribe specifically. I'll spare you guys, but the current situation, let's say with natives in the United States, we all have health systems, which is really cool. Most of our tribes will pay for health for our citizens, which is really a kind of a cool and neat thing. But all of those services are contracted through Indian Health Services. Indian Health Services is in the same branch of the U.S. military as the CDC and the FDA. Okay, so again, we're Native Americans are just ceding their health to this same system. So even the indigenous that are still indigenous are getting eroded, and their connection and roots to nature and to all that are going away. But I do think it's all going to come back. To your point, I think it's all coming back now. So,
yeah, it's such an interesting time to be alive. I got a couple questions here from some people that I spoke to before our conversation. So I want to try to get a couple of these bad boys in here and see what you think. Here we go.
Okay, let's do it.
The endocannabinoid system is often described as a master regulator of homeostasis in the body. What are the philosophical implications of having such a complex and interconnected regulatory system that underpins so many of our physiological processes?
Well, that's a very, very good question. And I'm a logician, I guess, if that's a proper word. So I kind of more look at it through algos, right? So through algorithms. And if I'm going to really kind of figure out how you work and if I'm going to do the best job that I possibly can in kind of deconstructing you as a machine, then I've got to know the algos, right? So I've got to know what the top, decision is and kind of where the top, those top if then else statements, if you will. And so that's the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is those top, well, circadian sits a little bit above this. So you do have some systems that sit above it. But physiologically, the way that you're controlling, let's say, most cells and most organs in your body is the endocannabinoid system. So it is your top algorithm, if you will. How does that translate philosophically? It depends on where your head's at. but you go a lot of different ways with that. But to me, it's the tie-in to God. It's how God touches us. Mitochondria would be our direct kind of, scientifically provable, access to light, and light to me would be the, God's voice. So it's kind of all that to me.
Yeah. What are some of the things you see on the horizon for the endocannabinoid system? Do you see maybe in the next year, do you think that there's going to be some sort of growth between the endocannabinoid system and the companies like 23andMe or these companies that can really take a good look at your individual genetic profile?
Yeah, so that's a good question. 23andMe, I wouldn't send my stuff there, but for a variety of reasons. But that's a very good question. So I think you're going to have a couple of things happen. So you're going to have this continued, let's say, progress of what's happening in the States now with medical and recreational use programs. You're going to have a lot of money from pharmaceutical and tobacco to drive that to recreational use. So to basically keep this off of your radar as a medical thing and more as a liquor store thing. Okay. So this is for fun. It's not medical. It's, we'll give it to you for fun, but it's not medical. I just saw a stat on Michigan's medical market since they legalized recreational, and it's gone down. So that's not what we want to have happen. So activists like me need to continue to be out here talking and kind of informing and educating people. But that's going to continue to rock and roll along the way that it is. Again, states have won that right here in the United States, so that won't change. You know, you break the Constitution if you tried to change that. The biggest thing, two things I think, biggest drivers that are going to really change this. The world would be the biggest one. So I'm kind of part of a situation that's trying to bring conferences to the world for medical marijuana and not just medical marijuana, but how to regulate it, you know. And I don't know if you know this or not, but I was the activist who wrote the law in Oklahoma. So I know a lot about the regulatory and how it works and how I screwed it up. So we screwed it up in Oklahoma. We made it better now, but, you know, so how to do all that, right? So we've got all these lessons learned that we can bring to other countries. So other countries are going to begin to light up. Other countries are going to be, you know, a country like Thailand is in an interesting position. It's kind of out of control now. As it gets more out of control, it's medical, and they may decide as a government, we want to lead the world in research here. Now, I want them to hire me right away. If they decide to do that, I'd be very excited about that. But, you know, you may have situations like that facilitate all this. To answer your question, tons of research needs to be done. Tons and tons of research. We need to have the endocannabinoid system taught at every single major university as a PhD level program. There are no PhDs in the endocannabinoids. I'm the best you're going to get. I'm sorry. There's a lot of PhDs that are like me that are self-taught, but there is no program that's minting PhDs in the endocannabinoid system yet. There needs to be. There's got to be. We can't have PhDs teaching MSs because we don't have any PhDs yet. So we've got to change that situation. How do we change that situation? Again, the government needs to be letting grants around this system. I'll tell you a couple of kind of cool stories about, and this is how things can change, but this is the way that they are now. So I was a TEDx speaker in 2022 on the endocannabinoid system. And TEDx is if you've never been through it, you know, it's a very scripted thing. So you give your talk 100 times. It's pretty well scripted by the TED people. I mean, you're saying what you want to say, but they're telling you where to stand, how to say it, you know, all this kind of stuff. And the people that you're talking with hear your talk, God, you know, 20 different times. So yeah, it gets annoying, believe me. So we're in the green room and we're all getting ready to do our TED Talks. And so we're all kind of nervous and everything. Everybody's talking. I go, my TEDx will never see Big TED. All the speakers laughed at me. Ha, ha, ha. Yes, it will, Chip. There's nothing controversial in your thing. Yeah, of course it will. Come, you know, we do the speeches, the videos come out, you know, we all get our videos, you know, we're seeing them go up on Big TED. And everybody's going, where's Chips? Where's Chips? Told you. I mean, it'll never, and it's still not up there and it never will be. Okay. So, and there's a reason for that. You know, we know TED is likely controlled. Again, pharma doesn't necessarily want this information out, you know, so it's still censored. So, you know, that's kind of one thing that happens. I can tell you about our company and everything that we've been through trying to develop from 2014 to, you know, 2022. And we don't even have that company. I got tired of it. I couldn't do it anymore. No joke. I mean, it just, we couldn't make any money. We're just defending ourselves all the time, you know, so that has to change. And and I'm just telling it from my personal experience. Believe me, there's people who've been through similar, if not worse. But I think that is beginning to change now. It is slowly beginning to change. So I had a call with, I won't tell you what pharmaceutical company, but I had a great call with a pharmaceutical company right before this, you know, interview. So they're opening up and beginning to at least, you know, try to steal things from us, which is good. That's what we need to have happen. You know, pharma and natural products need to come together to build what comes next. And we need their help and they need ours. So
yeah, it's a great point. Do you think, is there, from where you sit and the work that you've done, do you think there's a real threat to big pharma profits by using plant medicines that don't really have a patent on them, or you know, molecules that are unpatentable?
They didn't even worry about this. You know, they did Deshay back in the 90s, you know, so they kind of created their firewalls and stuff, you know, against natural products in the 90s. So they really didn't worry about this much, but I think they're beginning to worry about it now. They're beginning to listen. You know, if you think a drug development company. So,
Yeah.
any drug development company, their customer, once they develop their drug, their customer really isn't you. It's insurance, right? So they're
Mhm.
selling that drug to insurance, and then insurance is, they're selling that drug to doctors, and they may be selling to doctors too, but they never hear from you. You're not their customer. It's doctors and insurance. Ozempic. So the need for
Yeah.
Ozempic right now, the weight loss drug,
Yeah.
completely reshaping this landscape, because you've got and again, Ozempic is not, if you want a safe solution, contact George and he can contact me. I'll give you a safe solution. But Ozempic is not safe because, again, you can't fight some of these big fasting and fed switches in your body. There's better ways to do things by blowing with the wind. But Ozempic has created it's a groundswell of
Yeah.
customer demand that is now driving the pharma industry. Now, that's never really happened that way before. So it's really interesting. So they're beginning to listen, and they're beginning to understand that, going and taking a cannabis leaf and making a drug out of it is not going to be what they do. But they might take some pieces out of cannabis and look at those as drugs. They might begin to, look at combining things and engineering things into drugs like they should be doing,
Yeah.
instead of single molecule stuff. So I see this is beginning to change. And just in the conversations that I'm having and the interest that I'm getting, from pharmaceutical companies, I'm seeing that the tone, let's say, change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems to me that there's so much demand, or at least I see the industry growing at such a pace. I don't see how the pharmaceutical companies cannot want to be involved in something that's good for people and something that's helping people. And the results are undeniable when you look at PTSD and different types of plant medicines. Like it's just changing people's lives in a way that is good for them, good for their family, good for their community, and good for the planet. I can't imagine a pharmaceutical company not wanting to be a part of that unless it threatened them somehow.
Yeah, and that's the question, So, why wouldn't you? Is it threatening, and why is it threatening? Why
Yeah.
is helping you with your health and kind of creating a better you threatening? It shouldn't
Yeah.
be. Yeah, we should
Yeah.
all be rowing the boat in the same direction. And to your point, I think part of the Great Awakening, part of what we're going through, is coming to the realization that very realization that we just mentioned, that,
Yeah.
again, if their motives were good, they wouldn't be behaving in the way that they are. So that must indicate their motives are not good. And they're
Yeah.
not. Some of them. There's
Yeah.
certainly good pharma companies. I'm not,
Sure.
yeah, but they're
Yeah.
bad ones too.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's interesting how all of these, most people don't know this, but at the end of World War II, there was a big giant German conglomerate called IG Farben. And a lot of these, let's say, companies that we're talking about modeled their existence off of IG Farben. So IG Farben, Monsanto would have had its
Mm.
genesis in IG Farben.
Yeah.
Bayer would be still part of IG Farben. A lot of the big, let's say, food companies and agricultural companies would have had their genesis or could tie back to IG Farben. And these companies are still connected, and still kind of, if you look at I don't know if you've seen the aggregate of the food companies, and they all roll up
Yeah.
to 4 or 5 different
Yeah.
companies. Same
Of
with,
course.
big agriculture and everything. So all companies will roll up to these IG Farben-like companies. So it makes you wonder, I mean, did somebody just take that World War II model and we're still living under it with these corporations? And, would any of these corporations kind of have a similar attitude and similar motivation that we're talking about? And likely, yes, and that's, and, they're all kind of conglomerated now in these big, BlackRock type
Yeah.
organizations. So easy to
Yeah.
control, easy to set an agenda, easy to set an agenda all through hundreds and thousands of companies if you control the parent. So.
Yeah. In some ways, it makes me, if you read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, or you do any research on some of the medical experimentation that was done on humans at that time, it kind of echoes COVID a little bit. Like, you know, to see that there are these certain types of vaccines that are rolled out that don't have any testing or hardly any testing, and they're given to wide groups of people, control groups, and you know, it's so mind blowing and shameful. Although I can see the reasons why people would do it, to have a, a real-time medical experiment on unknowing people. Like I like the benefits and the information you could get from that are probably incalculable. You can learn so much from doing that. And I think that that is what the idea was when they experimented on humans in World War II. And it's probably been going on. Like if you look at the Tuskegee experiment, or you know, some people say things about HIV. Like you can see that this real-time
COVID.
experimentation hasn't changed. Like it's continued. I don't know that IG Farben was really ever dismantled, or at least not that model. Like it's happening today.
Completely, yeah, I completely agree with you. You know, COVID, I would say, is an experiment.
Yeah.
And it appears to me, again, I'm just an observer here. I don't have any proof of this, but I think it's pretty obvious to all of us that you know, they experiment on us in different ways. So they might like actually experiment on us with a drug, or they might experiment on us on our willingness to take that drug. So, you know, can I manipulate you into getting a COVID jab? And
Yeah.
how much of the population, you know, can I manipulate into that? And I think they play these games for future, you know, to see
Sure.
how they can influence. Again, it's all about that cue, right? So it's all about your and my collective consciousness. And if I can steer that collective consciousness, then I have control of you. I have control of the world. I have control of history. I have control of outcomes.
Yeah.
You know, if you're controlling that, then I don't, right? The
Yeah.
thing that we all have to do, this is what we're all going to come to grips with. And there's been a lot of evil done to you and I, a lot of evil. But at the same time, didn't I raise my hand and allow it to happen to me? And that's the hard truth. And that's the hard truth that we're all going to have to face. But as we face that truth, we will make change. We will say, yeah, I did that, but boy, fool me once, but you ain't never going to fool me again. I ain't never going to let that happen to me again. You know, and I'm never going to let that happen to the world again. And the decisions that I made that allowed this to happen, you know, we all allowed COVID to happen. We all participated in the, you know, in the shutdowns and the all of that. And, you know, we didn't have to do that, you know, so it's easier if you stand up with me. But, you know, we all have to stand up, and we all have to take accountability that, you know, if you know, did the US government create COVID in Ukraine and biolabs? Well, if they did, you and I paid for it.
Yeah.
We paid for it with our tax dollars. We agreed to that at some level. So we all have to take accountability for this. And that's the way we'll begin to really change things. So.
I like that. I think that speaks, that's like the antidote to the incredible division that's being thrust upon us, is that like we're all responsible. And responsibility doesn't have to be a bad word. It can just mean the ability to respond. And when you look at it from that angle, it kind of empowers you. Like, oh, it's our tax money that's going to bomb people. I paid for that. I don't want to pay for that, you know, or what? Why? We're going to pass how much money to go to Israel and Ukraine right now? 91 billion? What about all the people that are homeless? What about our country? Like, and it's that idea of, okay, well, you know what? Maybe I'll quit my job. How about that? I won't pay any tax money. You know what I mean? Or how about instead of consuming stuff on Twitter, I'll make my own podcast. I'll stop consuming their entire narrative and I'll create my own. And people will be like, what's that going to do? You'd be surprised what it would do. It'll change the way you see the world. And you as an individual, your frequency, your resonance, it's contagious. You could smile, you could talk to cool people. It changes, man. It changes everything.
Do we really need money? I mean, imagine if you could eliminate money and just create a barter system that was, you know, fair trade, right? So but we're talking about these ideas now because these ideas are coming, and we're all, what are we going to put in our queue? So what will the pharmaceutical system look like that we all want? Well, we're all making that decision now. That's why we're having these conversations, which is really cool. Yeah.
It's maybe this is what freedom looks like.
Freedom is work. Freedom
Yeah.
is,
Yep.
freedom is not sitting back and letting someone else make my decisions for me. Freedom is discerning through every one of those decisions with copious amounts of information and then making a really informed decision. And that's work. And a lot of us quit. We
Yeah.
just, and I mean, generationally, our parents and our parents before
Yep.
us, I did. I wasn't awake 10 years ago, not
Yeah.
like I am now. I
Yep.
quit. I gave up, I bought into the system. I
Yep.
make money, play golf, go on vacations, raise a family.
Yeah.
A lot of us do that, but a lot of us are waking up. So that's the cool thing. The majority of us are waking up. It's
Yeah.
interesting when you look at polls, right? So you look at, political polls is the best
Mm-hmm.
way to see this. And I'll go, live in Oklahoma. So Oklahoma is a very conservative state. I'll go around and talk to people and, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And so I'll kind of do my own poll. I'm a math
Yeah.
guy, right? So I know how to do that. And then you look at polls on the same subjects. It's like, that's not what everybody around me thinks. And, that might be what people, and you
Totally.
sort of go to this, that's what people in New York or Hawaii think, right? But no, because you're doing the same thing I'm doing. You're going, well, people think like me, but it must be those people in Oklahoma that skew these polls, right? We all think alike. It's so easy to unite us. It takes so much work to divide. You have to have polls, you have to have political elections, so you have to work to divide. Hopefully they'll just run out of gas. That'd be the best thing, George.
Well, I think that's why the financial system is breaking, is that the narrative is breaking. And those two, you can't control a population if you can't control the narrative. And that's what's breaking down, is people see the division, they see the bullshit, and then they see all the money going away. You're like, wait a minute, that's ours. And it's this immigrant's fault. No, it's the white guy's fault. No, it's the black guy's fault. No, it's the trans people's fault. No, all of us are being divided against the people that are taking all the money. Like it's not that hard to see. And it's not like this hasn't happened before, like international finance or national finance. But yeah, I do. I agree. I think we're waking up and we're going to see some.
Yeah, one of the most, and again, I don't want to pick on any organization. There's a
do it. Go ahead.
If you know of this, man that I'm going to speak of, then you'll know, what organization he was a part of. And there's lots of good people, let's say, that are in that organization. But there was a guy named Albert Pike that wrote a letter, and Albert Pike was instrumental in my Chickasaw Nation, our treaties with the U.S. government. So he was actually the attorney that represented a lot of Indian tribes.
I didn't know that.
But he wrote letters, and he wrote letters to, let's say, peers in his organization. And one of the letters that he wrote described 3 world wars. This was in 1871, 3 world wars. And he described World War I just down to the parties involved and down to the outcomes perfectly. He described World War II in the same manner. And he described World War III in a very interesting way. But he described World War III as a battle between Christians and Muslims. And aren't we seeing that set up right now? And aren't we in the middle of that right now? And, the outcome of that battle would be, everybody's so disillusioned with Allah or God that it's now time that Lucifer can emerge as the light bringer, the, glory of man, of, whatever, right? So, there's a plan, that these people have. That's a long running plan. Some of us have spent a lot of time wrecking that plan, which has been kind of fun. But it's, and again, it's going to be interesting to see how this all turns out, but we're kind of, we're right at that moment now. We're really right in the crosshairs, right now. Spiritually, energetically, I think that eclipse was an interesting thing.
Yeah.
The sun every 11 years will change polarity. So it'll go from, let's say, a plus to a minus, or from a minus to a plus. Does that matter here? Does that mean energy is more favorable in one direction or another? Maybe, likely. So I think we're just I think we're going to see a lot of change, let's say from April 8th forward, pretty rapidly, which will be pretty cool.
Yeah, me too. Our good friend Clint Kyle says Albert Pike and James Bowie, Arkansas boys and Freemasons.
yeah, there you go. Yeah. So you named the organization, and there's a lot of good people, in that organization, but
Yeah.
If I want to kind of control things, that's a good organization to use to do so. So I would just say that. Boy, we went way away from the endocannabinoid system. Wow.
That's what, it's fun though. It's like good conversations, you know, and I think that a good conversation is like a stream that flows from the mountain to the ocean. It just finds its way. So,
Agree.
well, this is fun, man. You should come back. We should have more conversations. Maybe we'll bring Clint on, or we can find Mark, and we can have more discussions about things as they arise. And before I let you go, though, Chip, where can people find you? What do you have coming up, and what are you excited about?
Oh, yeah, sure. So we have a brand. So I have a patents around what we do. So we manufacture, let's say, natural products and CBDs that impact the endocannabinoid system. So
Nice.
that brand is called TrueMedX, and it's TrueMedX.com. I have a lot of intellectual property. So I work and I'm always looking, let's say, for open-minded pharmaceutical companies to work with. I have, all kinds of intellectual property, endocannabinoid testing, to how you make changes with the system and, drug ideas, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So I've got lots of intellectual property that I'm kind of always shopping and looking for, partners to work with to develop, because it's important and it'll make a difference.
Yeah.
And then day to day, we have a clinic. So we can't call them patients. I'm not a doctor, but we see customers, and we use bioresonance and thermal imaging to evaluate them. And then we use our TrueMedX products to kind of help them, or we recommend out. So one thing I feel is important as a kind of a, let's say, helper of people, is to educate you about how you work. So basically give you the tools to help yourself. And then, if you want to kind of make it easy and use one of our natural products, then great, do so. And then I work with, I have worked with University of Mississippi for a long time with a researcher there. And we're still working together on some, let's say, intellectual property around testing the system. So all different kinds of things, but the day-to-day is the clinic and the brand that we have called TrueMedX.
What are the laws in your area on cannabis? I know that in different parts of the country, there's different laws, and some are more liberal and some are more conservative. But what are the laws around medical cannabis in your area?
Well, the nice thing about the laws in Oklahoma were I wrote them.
That is a good thing.
And then I managed to petition the state with a bunch of help from We the People.
Right.
And I had to do that twice, but I managed to get my law on the books in Oklahoma. So we've got a good situation here in Oklahoma, and we won the day in Oklahoma really with there was just, Chip and his wife, Cindy, and a guy named Frank Grove, who really did everything here in Oklahoma. So there wasn't any big business there wasn't any big pharma agenda. There wasn't any big cannabis agenda with what we did. It was completely We the People. So here in Oklahoma, we have a really good situation. And I watched this develop in so many other states. And again, I wrote everything in 2015, so it was a long time ago. But in Oklahoma, I wanted it to be medical. Recreational, I don't really, if you want to do your liquor store thing, do your liquor store thing. But I'm more concerned with medical. So I wanted to make it open access. And I saw at the time where every other state was writing in medical conditions. So you have to have, toxic wasting syndrome or cancer, or, whatever, in order to qualify for a card. Well, I'm a researcher here, and I know in 2015, I knew enough at least to know, medical marijuana is going to help regulate your body. It doesn't really matter what's wrong with you. It's going to help regulate that situation and kind of right that situation. So to medical condition it is folly. So let's not do that. And then the other thing that we have here in Oklahoma that's unique is every other state that did a medical program would cap their commercial licenses. So we're only going to have 10 growers and 10 processors and 10 dispensaries. And the way that on the back end, the way that all of that worked, it was just brother-in-law to the highest bidder, right? Because those licenses are worth millions and millions of dollars in that controlled environment. So I wanted to make our program on the business side accessible to every Oklahoman. So anybody who wanted to get in the business, I thought they had a right and needed to have the right to get in the marijuana business. So I set unlimited licenses, meaning there were no license limits, and a $2,500 license fee. So anybody in Oklahoma who wanted to get in the marijuana business did, believe me.
Right.
And I thought it was right and fair, but it created this first free market situation that's never really happened in marijuana before. You know, Colorado, when they went rec, you could kind of argue after a year they opened it up and it kind of got to be that way, but it was controlled before it got that way. So we're the first market to ever really be open. Now, what has that resulted in? We don't have any. So in marijuana regulation right now, a big deal is diversity. So, okay, you know, state of Maryland or, you know, state of New Jersey, you know, what is your diversity profile with your licensees? You know, because you've controlled licensees. So are you making that diverse? So there's this huge argument about diversity. In Oklahoma, we don't have any of that. It was open, you know, if I speak to a group of commercial license holders in Arizona, they're very white in color. If I speak to a commercial group of, you know, owners in Oklahoma, they're as diverse as Oklahoma is because it's a completely open market. The other thing that's nice about Oklahoma, because it is so much of an open market, is that I, as a patient, when I go into a dispensary, there's unlimited selections of product. There's a great diversity of products. So I can find tons of different edibles, beverages, tablets, tinctures. We don't have suppositories for some reason. I don't know why. But, you know, I can find all manner of things in our market that I can't even find flour sometimes in Missouri, you know. So yes, it matters. And yes, it matters, you know, on how the law is crafted. You know, trade organizations matter a lot. This is we're building an industry from the ground up. I just had a meeting with the Oklahoma regulatory here, and I try to help the Oklahoma regulatory. I want to help the Oklahoma regulatory, and they're open, which is great. So they want to hear, you know, ideas and all this kind of stuff. So we were having a kind of a meeting with them. And you know, there's so many things that need to change with regulation in cannabis. But one of the big things in Oklahoma that's broken is we have our legislature that all they're doing is they're listening to, you know, Joe Citizen, and Joe Citizen may have all different kinds of opinions about what needs to be done, but it's restrictive. It's restricting freedoms and liberties that we already have won. And this is where our legislature right now seems to be at right now. Well, our regulatory has all these needs. I mean, they have needs for all different kinds of things that they need to get through the legislature. And they don't talk to each other. They don't talk to each other because it's a new industry. So I go and talk to lawmakers and I go, well, you know, you're not talking to the OMMA. Why not? And, you know, how do you talk to the petroleum industry? Oh, well, we talk to the lobbyists. So you communicate with the petroleum industry through their lobbyists. Yes, we communicate with the petroleum industry through their lobbyists. So we need to get a lobbyist, you know, so we get a lobbyist. They won't talk to our lobbyists, right? So this is so broken because it's new. You know, state lawmakers don't know how to deal with it. It comes at them. You know, we come up to the legislature, you know, 600 wild, screaming, crazy ideas that nobody else does, right? So they just don't. It's scary to them. They don't know how to deal with it. And there's no trade organization. There's no interface with Chamber of Commerce's. There's no insurance interface. There's no banking interface. We're not a real boy yet, right? We're still playing in Pinocchio land. So we have to build all this stuff as an industry. And every time you build something, you know, it creates all kinds of stuff. But minimally, you know, legislatures need to be talking to regulatories in order to properly build this because it is so new and dynamic and different, and it's different than any other industry. So,
what an amazing idea to have open markets. And, you know, all I can think about is, well, I mean, I think about a lot of different things, but when you bring up that specific point about having an open market for cannabis and not needing diversity, like it kind of just shows you how much of a scam on some level that is. Like, just open it up to everybody. No, because then you can't control it. Like, it's crazy to me. Just open it up. Let the best people play. Let's see what happens. Let's have the best product. Let's have the best service.
And we got to do it that way here in Oklahoma because we did it. You know, we
Yeah.
the people really did it here in Oklahoma. In most states, you have some, you know, guy, hey, I want to be a cannabis guy. I'm a
Right.
rich guy. You know, I want to
Yeah.
kind of, you know, I'll help write the law. You know, I'll spend my $10 million, but I want my
Right.
$100 million hook, you know, in the law so that I make money. And so that's the way most of them are written.
Wow. Yeah.
Or again, you've got NGOs, non-government
Good
organizations
point.
that will get involved. And, you know, there's a George Soros organization that gets involved in a lot of these that is like tries to get marijuana legislation on the ballot at the same time as more left-leaning candidates. You know, so and they've found that to be somewhat successful. So they spend a lot of money to do that. And then they spend a lot of money to influence legislation. So, you know, is that bad? I think it's bad, but you know, it's legal right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a quick story about Oklahoma.
Yeah. Please,
So,
man. Let's hear it.
so in Oklahoma, we kind of won the day here. I mean, it's the first time it's ever happened, been, you know, like, you know, idiot led, because I led it, you know, but we the people, let's say, led, where we've really kind of won the day. And, you know, we've gotten what we want. So it's never really happened that way. Any other state, nothing like this has ever even happened in Oklahoma before, which is kind of cool. So we have this groundswell that caused change, right? So and we could do this through initiative petition. We kind of work around our legislature with petitioning. So we did that. We got what we wanted, this open market thing. Well, right off the bat, the powers that be, let's say, tried to wreck it by going the opposite way. Oh, let's just do nothing. So I put the regulation of marijuana at the Oklahoma State Department of Health. Oklahoma State Department of Health issues licenses for all manner of health things. So if you want to, let's say you wanted to become a tattoo artist and have a tattoo parlor, health would come out and inspect your parlor. They'd interview you in the presence of your parlor. And then they, you know, based on that interview and everything, afterwards they grant you your license. Same with, let's say, home care administration, same with hair cutting. Every single license that they issue required an inspection, an interview, and then a letting of the license, except marijuana. They decided to just do that with nothing. Oh, let's give you a license. Yeah. So again, they let it get out of control. But that's not really the story that I wanted to. And we got it back under control, you know, so it's under control now. But it wasn't the fault of the people that did the law why Oklahoma got out of control. It was the fault of the people that were tasked to regulate the law that didn't do a good job. But all that to say this. So we knew we made some mistakes initially in the law. And we also knew, and this was 2021, we also knew that we wanted to ask the adult use question because we'd had a program for 3 years. We had a lot of commercial industry really asking us, you need to ask the adult use question now. It's time now. It's time now. So we had a lot of pressure, let's say, from commercial industry to do that. But they're not the people who made it happen here in Oklahoma. You know, Preacher Joe, Teacher Betty are the people that made it happen here in Oklahoma. So we redo the initiative petition. So I rewrite SQ 788, which is our overriding law, with a lot of help. We go around to all state agencies. Gosh, we ran over you the first time. Sorry about that. You know, what do you want to see in a reformed marijuana law? What do you need? We went around to all stakeholders. We went even to the Oklahoma State Medical Association, which is an interesting thing. But we asked for input from all stakeholders in this new. So we wrote this thing. It was great. It was ready to go. We wrote the adult use on top of it. Adult use would have not wrecked the medical program here in Oklahoma. It's simply a driver's license versus your medical card. When you check out, you got a higher tax rate. So that was all it was here in Oklahoma. So cool stuff. So we introduced these in Oklahoma. If you're going to do an initiative petition, you have to file them with the Oklahoma State Supreme Court. So we file in fall of 2021, all of our stuff. We get a call after we filed from, I won't name the organization, but let's say a left-leaning organization that's very well known here in the United States of America. And I will name them, American Civil Liberties Union. So ACLU calls us and says, hey guys, we want to do a recreational petition in Oklahoma. We're like, why would the ACLU want to do oh yeah, in 2022, we have a governor's race. So I understand now why you want to do that. So, okay, well, that might serve both our purposes. So let's talk about that, right? So we can have a discussion about it. And well, we've got an adult use. It's already out there. In fact, it's filed with the Supreme Court. Why don't you guys just join our effort here in Oklahoma? It'd be great. We'd love to have you. Take your check, whatever you want to do to help. Right. They're like, nah, we don't, we got Berkeley on the phone here, some PhD from Berkeley. They think your adult use is crap. We're going to write our own and we're going to just run over you. We're going to do it in Oklahoma anyway. You can join us or not. Is sort of the attitude. We're like, good luck with that. But interestingly, they file in early 2022. We filed again 3 months before they did. They get released by the Oklahoma State Supreme Court before we do. So they're in the field before we are with a petition about reforming marijuana before we are. So we get lost. We pulled our petitions. There's no way we're going to compete with their million dollar money truck, which they came and ran over us with. So they quickly got their signatures. Again, they're driving to get on the ballot in November. Well, we made sure they didn't get on the ballot in November. And again, there's ways that we did that, but we made sure they didn't make the ballot in November. They ran over us with their money truck. We'll make sure you don't make the ballot in November. So they had no influence on our November election. Our governor decided to put them naked on the ballot, only question on the ballot, in March of 2023. So March of 2023. Wow. The adult use, and this was an out-of-state written question. It did not respect our program at all. And believe me, we spent a lot of time telling people that, all right? So this was naked on the ballot in March of 2023. I've polled adult use in Oklahoma since 2014. So it always polls at 45%, 45%. So these guys could have made it happen if they could have gotten 5% through advertising or whatever. But they didn't realize, I guess, that they needed to work with us and that they weren't going to do this here in Oklahoma. So again, Preacher Joe and school teacher Betty and, a lot of people around Oklahoma, let's say, got personal phone calls that this would not be the right thing to do. That got 38% at the ballot box, and it didn't pass one Oklahoma county, which, we have major cities in Oklahoma, and it should have easily passed the two counties with our major cities, and it didn't pass any county in Oklahoma. So it illustrates that people are kind of awake. Certainly in Oklahoma they are, but they're awake about this. They're discerning. They're not just taking the cue right off. They're kind of doing the work. They're exercising their freedom, as you and I talked about. And they are discerning through this difference. They're not biting right off at adult use. They're thinking about it and making a proper decision, which is awesome. And it's the first time marijuana stood naked on a ballot. And sadly, it got trashed on the ballot, 62% no. But it's interesting. It's just interesting. So
it is interesting, and I'm grateful that you and the community there were able to do that. I think it speaks to the idea of, on some level, if I take it back to a higher power, it's almost like these plant medicines don't want to be bastardized. They don't want to be used. And the people are rallying around it, not letting it, whether it's cannabis, like a large, there was a time when if you started a cannabis company or a psilocybin company, oh man, you're going to make millions of dollars. But everybody who's trying to really go that way, at least in like the psilocybin industry, finds themselves at the sharp end of a stick. It doesn't like it. There is some sort of natural block against it being bastardized in a way that is strictly for profit. I love that, and it sounds to me like your community did an amazing job at outreach and defeating something that wasn't in the interest of the people. I mean, you should be. Do you go and talk to other individuals and communities that are setting up their laws in their state?
It actually interesting you say that. So we're looking at a kind of a conference structure.
Nice.
That would be a medical marijuana conference that we'd bring to other countries, but that would interface with the government when we brought it to a country. And Thailand is the first one that we're looking at. And Thailand is a lot like Oklahoma. So Thailand was very, let's say, generous in how they rolled out their medical marijuana program. And you've got a lot of greedy people that have taken advantage of that,
Sure.
and really kind of, it's somewhat out of control. But like bringing to Thailand, to their government, a group of, let's say, regulators and people that have had that same situation and got it under control, for lessons learned and advice, we think is going to be a huge thing. And then compare and contrast that to a country like Japan, which we may also be bringing a medical conference to. Japan is still closed. If I get, let's say, caught with, THC marijuana in Japan, it's, 7-year prison sentence. So that's a different conference. So that conference is very gentle, with the government. That conference is talking to the government about how we set up, your regulatory, here's some lessons learned from the United States. We got 44 horrible examples of how to do it wrong. Some of us have learned how to do it right. So, we can bring all those lessons learned. We can save you so much time and money and expense and, headache and heartache. So it feels like we're kind of beginning to, promote, let's say the wind is blowing where some of this can get out to the world. The United States is, Schedule 3, I think, is going to be the big driver in the United States and sort of changing things. And, it'll bring in pharma, which is scary, but at the same time, someone like me, I can't get very far without money, right? So I need, and at the same time, I realize in the conversations that we're having that money shouldn't be the thing, right? In a perfect world, I tell you what I need, you give it to me, and I sort of produce, what I say I'm going to produce. But our world doesn't work that way right now. So I'm very limited in, I can get pretty far in theory. I want to get pretty far in practice. And I can't, because of sort of resource, let's say, constraints. And it doesn't really have to be money. It could be lab. Somebody could walk in and give me a lab. That'd be great. I could rock and roll. But a lot of us, let's say, that are trying to drive these changes are just waiting. We're waiting for our pharma partner. We're waiting for our resources. We're waiting for the lid to come off this where we can really go. And, we'll change the world when that happens.
Yeah. It's such a wonderful time to see new ideas being born and possibilities being born, and I think it's inspirational, man. Thanks for doing it. I think it's a cool thing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for doing what you're doing. It takes all, I have things to communicate, but I need a platform to communicate them on, right? So it's without all of us, it's not going to work. And that's what we'll realize at some point, that, we all have to come together to form a liver. Right now we're just individual cells out here screaming in the dark. But if we could all come together and say, well, let's form a liver, now we're a collective. Now we can do some things, right? So now we can, metabolize fats.
So this isn't. Do you think that maybe, like, the people, there's clearly people that would like to bring the world together, and maybe the way they're doing it, do you think that it's the road to hell paved with good intentions? Are the people at the top saying, look, we all have to work together and we're going to force you to work together? You know what I mean? Like, is that what some of the banal, like the evilness is that we see, as people that are like, we're going to have to force these people to do it? But isn't, like, on some level, I try to, like, give them the benefit of the doubt, even though I'm horrified by the way in which they try to just force people into these positions that they're not. Like, they're, regardless of the individual, it sounds like they're trying to force this thing to come together.
Yeah, like my observation is we kind of live in this inverted pyramid, right? So the more evil would be one way to say it. I would, service to self, service to others, kind of the way I look at it. But, the more service to self you are, the higher you rise in the system, right? So if you're a good person, you're just going to, as soon as you get into any kind of structure, you're going to have all these evil people just take advantage of you for your naivete. You're just going to eat you up. And, I'm afflicted in that way. That happens to me all the time.
Right.
But I do think that it's changing right now. So what is an impetus of change? Well, now it's a deep rabbit hole. So I think there's many of us, and I would put myself in that camp. So let's say the Q movement is an interesting thing. So we've all been told about the Q movement, and that's a conspiracy to take down mainstream media. And we're, all about, we think everybody's a child trafficker, right? So there's been, satanic, child trafficker, right? So that's kind of been the casting of that movement. Well, again, I'm let's say I'm very familiar with that movement. I've been part of Anonymous for a long time, and let's say Anonymous got interested in that movement, and a lot of people got involved in that movement, and I know a lot of those people. And I'll leave it there, let's just say. But that movement, so if you look at kind of what the Q movement is doing, so you had basically a free speech board where this person named Q dumped information, and over 4,000 or so drops of information. But so what is that all about? And what does that mean? Well, again, the information is, sort of, let's say, discussion material about what we've been talking about all throughout this podcast. So it's just lots of pointers and information and stuff. But the people that are very close to that have come to understand that that's an operation. And the purpose of that operation is to bring awareness to, and it doesn't really matter what it is, to illustrate to the common man how out of balance and out of whack things are, and to make people glow. So in the very way that we were talking about, gosh, what are the motives of some of these pharmaceutical companies? They certainly don't seem to be helping us. Well, as soon as you realize that, they glow. Whatever that company is that you're thinking of, they're now glowing. They're now something that's on your radar that's not a good thing, that's out of whack, that's nonlinear. And, a lot of people are glowing right now, right? So we're seeing a lot of the rot in our government, the rot in our, local law enforcement, so through child trafficking, through all kinds of stuff, we're seeing this rot. So the purpose of the op is to create situations, and they call them games, counterinsurgency games, to create games to where these people have to out themselves. So I'm going to create a situation where Governor Joe, if you're a bad guy, you're going to have to show yourself, and you're going to have to show yourself to people that you're a bad person. So, there's, I don't know, 250,000 sealed indictments right now in the United States court system. There's never been anything like that in history. So that has to, mean something. So I always say, getting these people to glow is the hard part. Mopping them up is easy. It's getting them to glow that's hard, right? So I do think that we'll see a mop up soon. I think that won't be a United States. That would be a world mop up. It's already happening. It's already, if you are, let's say, if you really know the details of everything that's going on, there's absolutely very hard signs that, this is happening now. Like, BlackRock. So, BlackRock likely went bankrupt a couple of years ago. BlackRock is not behaving in any rational, in what rational manner do you force Bud Light to eviscerate themselves with a transgendered advertising campaign? And that believe me, that guy wasn't the guy who, came up with that, the CEO of Bud Light, right? So that came from up above, let's say. So you're already seeing, some of this begin to manifest. But, politically, things have to be right. They're not right now, but hopefully they will be right soon. You've got to see kind of the world align. I am as kind of un-American as this sounds, and I'm as red, white, and blue as an ex guy, believe me. But I don't really think Russia is a bad guy. I don't necessarily trust Russia, but if you look at if China started putting biolabs in Mexico on our border,
right? Well, of course we'd smack them.
I think we'd go smack them. Right?
Yeah. I heard some.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh no, we've gone far afield from the cannabinoid system.
It's interesting. One of the guys I like to listen to sometimes, this guy Matthew Eric, and he breaks down the world in a fashion that is oligarchs versus governments, and he paints some pretty interesting pictures about how, you can have a couple different systems that are emerging, and one is like the system of the oligarchs, and one of them is more of a governmental system. And if you look at Russia as sort of a government system that relies on the idea of sovereignty, like that is a system that a lot of other people don't want to have. And I'm curious, like I can see both of those sides, and I guess my question is, do they lead to the same thing? You know what I mean? Is it the level of corruption, or you got any take on that?
Sovereignty is a powerful word. And
Yes.
anybody listening to this, claim your sovereignty. And what I mean by that is claim your capital S Godhood, your sovereignty as a being, your incorruptibility, just claim that. But, again, in the same way that two of us would form a collective, a country is a collective. And if a country is not sovereign, then it's a slave.
Mm.
It's just that simple. I mean, if you're not a sovereign country, then you're, led around by something else, not your sovereignty. So a country has to be based on its sovereignty. Russia still holds its indigenousness. And I think that's very threatening to these people that want to divide us, right? So I can't enslave you if you're an indigenous people. It's really hard to do. I can enslave you if I dishome you, if I disgorge you, if I move you from Russia to, Mexico. Well, now I can enslave you. That's happened around the world, so many times, it's just incalculable. And if you look at the, hidden hand behind all of that, it's always the same people. So, but Russia's just an interesting place in history. And it's kind of, it's maintained a lot of its culture and indigenousness, through Christianity even. So, the Russian Orthodox Church is different, than the Western Church, let's say. So anyway, they're interesting. But if I'm a bad guy, and I'm kind of a European bad guy, they must be toppled. They cannot stand the way that they are. And you see that attitude just everywhere, even when it's folly, it's just this hatred of Russia just permeates our military and, government and, British government, UK, EU. And why, they're an imperial bloc. They're a sovereign nation that stands in my, imperial quest. So Ukraine's a good way to take them out, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. It blows my mind to think about the battle of supply chains and stuff like that. It's such an amazing time to be alive, because we're right in the middle of it, right? Like, we are right in the middle of, on the cusp of what is possible for the future generations. Like, maybe people have always felt that way, but it seems so close to me. Maybe it's because it's my age, or my faith, or something,
I think we live in the greatest time to be alive. I think we live in a better time than the time of Christ, or, pick your time, the American West, or we live in the greatest time. It's hard. And every single one of us is fighting the war between the ears right now. And we all are, and, we're all trying to support each other through that. It's interesting though. And I think, I believe I got knowledge from God, really, about the endocannabinoid system, and I'm open to that. And I continue to kind of be, let's say, led in my research and kind of what I'm looking at. And I look at all different manner of stuff, but human function. But I believe I'm led, and I just, I don't believe that God would have led me to the knowledge that I have without that culminating, in some way. And I think there's a lot of people out there like me, so, and you're likely like me down your lane, right? So you probably feel led and have knowledge and, feel like you're doing exactly what God wants you to do right now. So the more of us that get together, the more of us that have these conversations, the more that we'll change it. But you can't wait for someone else to do it.
That's right.
We have to change the world. We have to break this system. We have to rebuild these institutions. So,
yeah, I love it. I think every one of us becoming the best versions of ourselves is the answer. We find each other and we get stronger and stronger. We build a better way through it. So, man, this is so much fun. I apologize if I took you down some places you didn't want to go, but I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think it's fun, and I think it's necessary.
No, it's great, man. And I'm an open book. I really am. It's I don't really talk about the let's say the truth stuff much that I do, but I'm that's important, and I'm very proud of the work that all of us have done there and the change that we've been able to make. So
yeah, and I think it goes hat in hand with the different sort of natural medicine that's out there. I hope the natural medicine helps you see things more naturally. So I think it's necessary, man. I'm so stoked we got to talk about today. Hang on briefly afterwards because I still want to talk to you just for a short moment. But to everybody out there who participated, Mark, Clint, Adam, Griggs, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us today. Go down to the show notes, check out Chip, reach out to him. He's got some fascinating ideas, and he's the architect for building a system that is doing fantastic in Oklahoma. And he's got some great ideas, and he's a splendid human being. So that's all we got for today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a beautiful day. Aloha.